Hello everyone and welcome to a new topic in our LIS 203 subject, Advanced Management for Library and Information Science. So this is Lynn Cristal Ilumacad and today I'm going to share to you our new topic which is library budgeting. So to start with, I'm going to share to you the contents of my presentation. The first part would be for budget basics. So in this section, we're going to tackle about the definition of budget, what is library budgeting, and the common terms associated with library budgeting. For the second part is the sources of library funding, or where do we get our library funds, or where do we get our library budget. So the third part is the budget development process. So in this section, we're going to tackle the steps on how to make a library budget. And the fourth and the last are the types of budget. So these are the types of budget which are generally used in the library context. So first things first, the budget basics. What is budget? According to ODLIS, or the Online Dictionary of Libraries and Information Science, budget is the total amount of funds available to meet a library's expenditures over a fixed period of time. So this is usually 1 to 2 years. In most budgets, funds are allocated by category of expenditure, called lines. In chronically underfunded libraries and library systems, budgeting can be a major source of frustration for librarians and library administration. So, library budgeting. So, the library budget is a tool for turning library dreams into reality. So, given that a budget is the expression or the financial expression of the library's plan, so the budget determines the services that will be offered by our library and the resources devoted to each library program. So therefore, before a budget can be formulated, the plan for library services must be developed and the goals and objectives must be established first. So a carefully developed budget will ensure that available funds are effectively utilized and utilized to realize your library's service objective. And these are the budgeting terms associated with the library. First, we have here the fiscal year. Fiscal year is the 12-month period that an institution uses for its annual budgeting and financial reporting. Generally, this is not a calendar year. When we say calendar year, it, it starts from the 1st of January and ends at the 30th of December. But when we say fiscal year, it generally starts at the 1st of July and ends in the 30th of June the next year, or June 30th time period. Next is the operating budget. Operating budget is made up of the day-to-day cost of running the library. For example, the library utilities such as electric bill, water bill, internet bill, and so on. Next is the library personnel, or basically the salary of your library personnel and staff. Next is the library maintenance. So these are recurring budget items and can be anticipated from year to year. When we say recurring, these are tasks which may tasks when we say recurring, these are tasks which occurs periodically or regularly. So the third budgeting term is the capital cost. So these are those associated with irregular activities such as remodeling or renovating your library or a part of your library. Major technical upgrades, for example, purchasing a new set of computers for your internet station, for your library staff, or for your OPACs. And next is building a new building or building a new library building. So these are the irregular activities in your library which may fall under the capital cost. So materials budget allocation. Libraries have a range of costs related to collection development and management. Many that may not appear to be obvious. The actual cost of the materials plus postage and handling are the anticipated expenditure. However, there are the personnel costs that are generally the largest expense with salaries, benefits, and continuing education. The material cost will need to include subscriptions of new cover print and online journals and online databases. So budget distribution. Budgets are distributed in a number of different ways. For example, a long-standing practice was 60% of the budget under the will be allocated to the salary of your personnel or the continuing education for your personnel, and the 40% is for the library materials. However, there is an evidence that it is narrowing to 50-50 split. So 50% for personnel and 50% of your budget is for the library materials. Next is the sources of library funding. So these are the five common sources of library funding. We have here tuition, tax, fundraising, fines or library fines, and lastly, the library fees. So tuition in private schools or in private institutions, both K to 12 and higher education, they receive no direct tax support and are primarily funded by the student tuition. So these are library fees that are added to our student tuition. So these are funds or library fees that are added to our student tuition. Next is tax. The primary funding for public school libraries, comes from local tax appropriations. So state universities also receive support from tax dollars, but their primary source of funding is also from the tuition. The third source of library funding is the fundraising. All libraries fundraising all libraries use fundraising to one extent or another to increase the support that they receive, and many write grants for additional revenues. The fourth source of library funding is the library fines. Fines may also be a source of funding, but the policy of charging fines is the subject of debate concerning their effectiveness in encouraging the return of materials or the return of your library materials and concerning their public relation effects. So before establishing a fine policy, the library should consider not only the possible revenue but also the potential negative public relation effects. Next is the library fees. Under some state laws, public libraries may not charge fees for information providing services. However, fees and charging for such things such as making computer printouts or using a copy machine are legal. So most fees, charges, and sales by libraries are subject to the state sales tax and any country. So the third part is about the budget development process. So here are the steps. Here are the steps on making a library budget. The first step in developing a library budget is to look at what the library hopes to accomplish in the next year. The availability of a current long-range plan will make this step much easier because the plan should already document your library services needs and the library activities necessary to meet those needs. The next step is to determine the total financial resources necessary for what the library wants to accomplish in the coming year. So often, increased funding is necessary because of the increased cost uh, or the increased usage of library materials, or there are new services that will be offered by your library. Additional resources for new services can also be made available by shifting resources from a lower priority to a
So the
higher priority.
next step is actually optional, but it is also necessary in developing a library budget. So the library board and or the library board finance committee may develop a budget draft. So the budget draft document are prepared by the library director and the library staff. The Board of Trustees will then review the draft budgets with the library director. The committee may also propose changes and finally approve the finished. After the written budget documents are approved by the board, the final step in the budget process is securing the funding needed to carry out the planned service program. So trustees, as volunteer public representatives, are especially effective budget advocates. Trustees should be involved in presenting, explaining, and supporting the library budget that was approved by the library board. So the board may need to make budget changes if the funding needed to balance the budget is not secured. Budget changes may also be required during the budget year if, for example, certain expenditures are higher than expected or costs are lower than expected. So the last part of my presentation is about the types of budget. So the following are the 6 types of budget which are commonly used in the library context. These are lump sum budget, formula budget, line item budget, program and performance budget, planning, programming, budgeting system, and lastly, the zero-based budget. First, we have here the lump sum budget. Lump sum budget or lump sum budgeting involves the allocation of the library's parent organization's top-level management of a lump sum of budget resources to the library. So the library is given a sum of money and told to function on that amount of money for a period of time. So, for example, your finance department or the finance department of your institution will give you a fixed amount of money or a fixed amount of budget. Then the library director or your library committee will then budget the specific amount of money for the whole school year or for the whole academic year. For example, your library is given 1 million pesos. For example, 1 million pesos, then your library council or your library director will then budget that 1 million pesos and allocate it to each services or programs of your library. So since the lump sum method lacks specific ties to organizational goals and objectives, many library directors prefer other types of budgets, so not the lump sum budgeting method. So the next type of budget is the formula budget. The budget allocation is typically tied to a numeric value such as full-time equivalents or FTE. For example, the number of FTA registered students multiplied by a fixed currency amount yields the budget for the library. So, for example, you have your institution has a total number of population of 2,000, then your library fee is 250. So 2,000 multiplied by 250 is your probable library budget. So that would be, for example, 5,000 pesos. Is 5,000 pesos will then be allocated as your library budget. So that is formula budget. So there is a formula multiplication of your total number of population or a specific population times a fixed currency amount. So this method has weakness. Primarily, the budget total is calculated at a late point in time and intrudes in advanced planning, especially for purchases and staffing increases within the library. So if the materials costs and material costs will also increase, this may this may affect the budgeting of your
So
library.
next is the line item budget. Line item budget is commonly used budgeting method for financial planning, listing specific revenue sources such as fines, print and copy, etc., and expenditure categories such as your library personnel, supplies, equipment, print materials, cereals, etc. So each category of activity is treated as separate unit from the list. It lists those items necessary to conduct an activity such as personal equipment, supplies, and books, usually in a standard format that does not vary from year to year or from system to system. So this is an example of a line item budget. So items are listed here in line. They are listed, and in this area will be the specific or the fixed amount allocated for each item for the last year, for the current year, and the next year. So amount allocated for each items. So the next type of budget is the program and performance budget. A program budget is sometimes called cost center or product budget. This is further broken down into particular program or project areas of service such as reference, circulation, collection, and programs. Whereas the program budget identifies goals and programs to carry them out. The performance budget, on the other hand, includes a measurement factor to respond to the question, how are we doing? Are we meeting our objectives and to what extent? So a program budget is what similar to line item type budget that each program in the program budget appears separately and is broken out in categories similar to the line item budget. So this is an example of a program budget. So the functions or the programs are then listed in the left side of the table, then program 1, 2, 3, and it was categorized into program 1, 2, 3. So the performance budgeting is a management oriented. Its principal thrust is to help administrator to assess the work efficiency of operating units by casting the budget in functional terms and providing work cost measurements to facilitate the efficient performance and prescribed activities. So the next type of budget is the Planning Programming Budgeting System or the PPBS. Planning Programming Budgeting System is advanced revised version of the program budget. This is more towards evaluation of performance of the program. Its emphasis is on the determination of the purpose of the library or other institution and clarification of its objectives and the development of programs to carry out the objectives. This is holistically planned budgeting mechanism where where other than economic factors, social and political factors are part of budget. So the important steps in PPBS are: first, identifying the objectives of the library. So we need to identify first the objectives of the library. Second, presenting alternative ways to achieve those objectives with cost-benefit ratios presented for each. So the third is identifying the activities that are necessary for each program. So we need to identify library programs or library activities necessary for the programs or for each objectives of the library. And the fourth is evaluating the result so that corrective assessment and feedbacking of the activities is also necessary so that corrective action can be taken for the next library programs. And lastly, we have here the zero-based budget or the ZBB. The focus of the zero-based budgeting is on that what will happen in the future that corresponds to the goals and objectives of the parent organization. So this budget starts on fresh paper, and this from scratch approach is viewed as an appropriate instrument to rank library programs by cost, importance to organizational goals, and to identify and eliminate programs that provide minimal value added. So according to Kendi and Taylor, 1994, zero-based budgeting is a planning and budgeting process that involves decision-making in all levels of management, starting with a zero base for budgeting and justifying the entire budget request in detail. It requires that all programs and operations at all levels be identified in decision packages, evaluated and ranked in priority order. So there are a number of similarities between program and performance budgeting and zero-based budgeting. So for the ZBB, there is a greater flexibility to achieve objectives, whereas in PPBS, a traditional way of achieving objectives. So next, ZPB, short-term budgetary systems within the planning context, whereas in PPBS, there is a long-range budgetary management system. And third, ZPB decisions are required concerning each program on an annual basis. And in PPBS, there is an overall program which is reviewed but not each year and not with an overt decision to fund or so that is the end of my presentation, and thank you for watching. So if you have questions, clarifications, or suggestions regarding my presentation, please do not hesitate to leave a comment below, and I will be more willing to reply to all your comments as soon as possible. Thank you for watching and have a nice day ahead.